So today we have two guest speakers that I'm going to introduce to you now. And we have Anna Noel-Storr, who's Head of Evidence Pipeline and Data Curation at the Cochrane Collaboration, an information specialist by background. Anna and her team manage systems in Cochrane aimed at helping to identify primary research and make Cochrane evidence more discoverable. She led the development of the Cochrane Crowd platform, Cochrane Citizen Science Initiative, which enables anyone with an interest in health to help identify and describe health research. And much of Anna's work involves testing and developing workflows that combine human and machine effort in the study of identification stages of evidence synthesis. She's currently involved in several Wellcome-funded initiatives, all aimed at making evidence synthesis more efficient and sustainable. And we also have Ella Flemyng, who is the Head of Editorial Policy and Research Integrity at the Cochrane Collaboration, and she leads the team that works with the wider Cochrane community to define standards for trusted evidence synthesis, covering methods, research integrity, and publication ethics. With over 10 years' experience in STEM publishing, her work involves research to inform policies and standards and mainstreaming best practice across the wider field. Ella is a council member on the Committee of Publication Ethics, COPE, convener of the Joint AI Methods Group, part of the RAISE Initiative Management Group, and investigator. Folks, are you okay to just keep your mics muted, if that's all right?
Yes.
Cheers, thanks. Easily done. So where was I up to? Yeah, she's the convener of the Joint AI Methods Group, part of the RAISE Initiative Management Group, and investigator on Destiny, a Wellcome-funded project creating digital infrastructure and tools to facilitate rapid evidence synthesis in climate and health. And today they're here to talk about AI tools. And as we all know, they're increasingly being used in evidence synthesis, but how do we decide whether using an AI tool is appropriate? And what are the considerations for performance and responsibility? So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to our two speakers, and the floor is over to you folks.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to try and share my slides now, so just bear with me a moment.
Okay. And just before we start, sorry, we have the Q&A enabled and chat. So if you do have questions, please type them in as we go along. And then at the end of each section, we'll hopefully answer those.
Brilliant. That sounds great. So hopefully, if Ella or Bob, you could just give me a thumbs up that you can see. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. We've called our session Being Responsible When Using AI for Evidence Synthesis, a framework for selecting and using AI tools. And I'm going to kick off before handing over to Ella. So just very briefly, in terms of declarations of interest, we are co-authors on the RAISE guidance, which we'll be talking about a lot today. And we're also both employed by Cochrane, as has just been described, which has supported our involvement with RAISE. And we're also involved, as Bob has already said, with a Wellcome-funded project called Destiny, which has also supported our work on the RAISE project. And just to acknowledge that these slides have been collaboratively pulled together by several people. So our aim today is to highlight 4 main expectations for evidence synthesis to be aware of when using AI tools. To understand how the RAISE guidance can help you navigate the 4 expectations. To introduce the responsible handover framework, which is designed to help evidence synthesis know when and how an AI tool might be safe and appropriate to use in an evidence synthesis, and to outline what key details regarding an AI tool are essential and should be provided by tool developers. And so first, just to ground us in a little bit of context, the process of conducting evidence synthesis is built on the core principles of rigor, transparency, and replicability. And there's good reason for this. In health and healthcare, the stakes are high, with decisions that affect people's lives made on the basis of evidence synthesis. The advent of AI in its generative form has caused a huge amount of excitement as well as uncertainty. Whilst forms of artificial intelligence, such as supervised machine learning, have been around for many years, it's really the advent of large language models that has produced a kind of seismic wave of hype and expectation that I think is unparalleled. In many ways, it's not hard to see why. They are seemingly easy to use, they work at speed, and produce often what look like very credible results. They have also dramatically opened up the potential task space, the areas and activities of evidence synthesis where AI could, both in terms of capacity, so how much of a task is being done, and capability, what kinds of tasks the LLM can be set up to perform. And as well as enormous potential, the challenges in using AI effectively and safely are numerous and include, of course, methodological challenges such as ensuring accuracy and reproducibility, but also ethical, operational, and technological challenges. As an evidence synthesist, navigating this space can seem extremely daunting and overwhelming. We have a responsibility to use AI, but only if we can use it safely and responsibly. And so to do this, we need guidance, frameworks, and infrastructure that enables us to learn and evolve as the technology itself evolves. It's a challenge for the whole evidence synthesis community. One organization, one group, or one tool is not going to solve this alone. And that's where RAISE comes in. So RAISE stands for Responsible Use of AI in Evidence Synthesis. And the initiative seeks to fill a gap in terms of providing guidance and standardized expectations in using AI in evidence synthesis. It started out after requests from the community for guidance on what tools to use and when to use them, and the realization that that's actually not an easy question to answer. The evidence base was very limited, and many tools that looked lovely and shiny on the outside were actually not fit for the purpose of health evidence synthesis. So RAISE was developed based on the principles of research integrity, which are honesty, rigor, transparency, open communication, care and respect, and accountability. We had heard across the community the sense of overwhelm, confusion, and a lack of clarity on expectations and responsibilities when it comes to using AI. The RAISE recommendations aim to address this by providing tailored recommendations for different roles in evidence synthesis. And this has been a huge piece of collaborative work with involvement from over 30 organizations from across evidence synthesis, and not just the healthcare domain. The first version of RAISE was released in September 2024, and we've since been collecting and addressing feedback, and we're now on to version 4, which is a 3-paper collection. So paper 1, RAISE 1, provides tailored recommendations for the 8 roles in the evidence synthesis ecosystem. RAISE 2 contains guidance on building and evaluating AI evidence synthesis tools. And RAISE 3 offers guidance on selecting and using evidence synthesis tools. So as I touched on in the previous slide, RAISE 1 provides recommendations for each of the roles in the evidence synthesis ecosystem. And you can see the 8 roles here on this graphic, if you've got fairly good eyesight, but they include roles such as the evidence synthesist, the methodologist, the AI tool developer, funders of evidence synthesis, etc. And critically, each role has a part to play in developing and using AI in a responsible way. The vision is that with each role in the ecosystem playing its part, a virtuous cycle is created where tools are developed that are fit for purpose and ready for use, making evidence synthesis faster and cost-effective, and ultimately leading to better decisions and improved outcomes. In November 2025, the Joint AI Methods Group published a position statement that highlights that Cochrane, Campbell, JBI, and the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence formally support the aims of RAISE, which has underpinned developments to their editorial policies and guidance on using and disclosing AI. The position statement included 4 expectations for our communities. The first is that evidence synthesists are ultimately responsible for their research, including the decision to use AI and how it is used. The second, evidence synthesis can use AI provided they can demonstrate it will not compromise the methodological rigor or integrity of their synthesis. The third, AI should be fully and transparently reported. And the fourth, AI should be used with human oversight. And what we're going to cover for the rest of this session is the how you can meet these 4 expectations. So starting with expectation 1, evidence synthesis are ultimately responsible for their research, including the decision to use AI and how it is used. So RAISE 3 contains a wealth of guidance to support evidence synthesis on selecting and using AI tools. And this is what we're going to be focusing on. For this first expectation, the responsible handover framework for an AI tool for evidence synthesis is particularly important. The original responsible handover of AI was developed by Sense About Science in collaboration with their partners, and the RAISE group adapted it to be specific for use of in our context in evidence synthesis. And so here are the 5 main domains in the responsible handover framework. Domain 1, what is the purpose of the AI tool? Domain 2, where have the training and testing data come from? Domain 3, is the AI tool validated and performs sufficiently for use? Domain 4 is around usability and user capability. And domain 5 is around transparency, licenses, availability, and documentation. The full version of this framework is quite extensive, as it includes, as part of the overall responsible handover, the expectations for AI tool developers, methodologists, and evidence synthesists, which are the 3 main roles that should engage with this framework. We have produced a simplified version of this framework specifically for evidence synthesis, which is what we'll be going through today. But just so you can see what it looks like all together, this is the full responsible handover framework, starting over on the left. Each role in RAISE is interlinked, as I've already mentioned earlier, and this framework is a clear example of how the AI tool developers, methodologists, and evidence synthesists need to support each other to enable adherence to the responsible AI use expectations. But before we dive into the responsible handover domains, it's possibly worth reminding that the vast majority of AI tools being developed are being done so by for-profit commercial organizations whose success criteria are not likely completely aligned with our priorities. Many of the tools are being marketed quite aggressively, accompanied by exaggerated claims regarding performance. So looking critically beyond marketing claims is vital, and of course something that an evidence-based community is very used to. But there is also the other side to this, which is that no AI tool will be perfect. All tools will have limitations. And if we can identify those, we can start to consider seriously whether an AI tool can be safely used. As with all tools or approaches, you should think about all of this prospectively, ideally at the protocol stage, and consider what will be acceptable for your review in terms of the potential impact of errors, i.e., what is at stake in your review if the task is performed incorrectly. This then needs to be balanced with an AI tool's performance, i.e., does the model perform well enough given the potential impact of error? And this could in turn influence the degree of human oversight or involvement you think is acceptable. And I really like this matrix that you can see on the screen here, which has come from Covidence, which shows essentially what I've just described, that interplay between the possible impact of error and the level of human oversight required. So it's a fascinating time to be working in evidence synthesis, but it's definitely not easy. And ideally, you need a multidisciplinary team applying the framework. Right, so let's start with domain 1. What is the purpose of the AI tool? And this is really about getting clear on both the purpose and the expected benefit of the tool. So the main considerations here are, is the intended use case and expected benefit clearly defined? And how well does it match the task you want to perform? Are you going to use the tool exactly as intended? For example, if you use a tool designed for meta-analysis in the field of climate health, yet your review is on the topic of preventing dementia, you need to think about the potential implications for performance and potentially be prepared to do some validation within the review, which we'll touch on a bit later. You also need to think about whether the level of human oversight is appropriate. What level of human oversight does the tool support? For example, are you able to check and edit, if needed, the tool's output? And for any AI tools built using large language models, you should be aware that the tool developers can change the underlying large language model used. So it's important that you're able to record the details of the model and version used in your review for full transparency. In addition, the prompts used to train an LLM impact how it behaves significantly. So it's best if these have been recorded by the AI tool developers. Although at the moment this is tricky, as many AI tool developers class this information as commercially sensitive and are very reluctant to share it. So domain 2, it's all about two distinct data sources, the training data and the testing data. Training data is used to teach the model something, and testing data is used to evaluate whether the model performs as expected. This concept of training data is very important for the more traditional types of automation or AI, like supervised machine learning, which relies on large quantities of already labeled data to learn from. The concept of training data for LLM-based AI tools is more challenging, and in part partly because providers of LLMs don't tell us specifically what their models are trained on, but we know that the data they have been trained on is massively broad, hence the name large language. And the main considerations for evidence synthesis here are the training and testing data sources disclosed and accessible? For any AI tools, whether supervised machine learning or large language model based, we do need to understand the data that had been used to test them. So ideally, that data needs to be disclosed. Do the training and testing data match your evidence synthesis domain or context? What we need to be able to understand is how the test data translates or matches our own context. Is the test data set sufficiently similar to our own review, and therefore we could expect the model to perform at the same level? Also, understanding the test data helps to flag any known or potential biases or limitations. And finally, is there a separation between the training, testing, and validation data sets? And this final point here is about separation of data sets. This is about avoiding data contamination, where a tool has been tested using data that it's already seen during its training phase. And so the third domain, is the AI tool validated and performed sufficiently for use? So really, essentially, does the tool perform well enough? And some key considerations here include whether the tool's performance has been validated and whether that validation is publicly available and how it is publicly available. Validations that are published in peer-reviewed journals should carry more weight than, for example, validations that are published on a tool developer's website. What would carry even more weight would be if the validations have been conducted by independent research teams rather than the AI tool developers themselves. Also, is the validation reported in sufficient enough detail to be transparent and replicable? This is another instance where it's helpful to have a multidisciplinary team with a methodologist or statistician on board to help assess whether performance metrics are appropriate. And Ella's going to touch on performance metrics a little bit later. But to give a brief example, tool developers will often report on an overall accuracy score. This is not usually the most useful or informative metric for us, as it combines both sensitivity and specificity into a single score. And in our domain, depending of course on the task at hand, we're often more interested in a tool performing with optimal sensitivity rather than optimal precision or specificity. And finally, another important consideration is whether the tool's performance can change over time. For example, if the tool is dependent on third-party large language models, the model could be updated independently of the tool, which might impact the tool's performance over time. And this is why the stability metric is important for large language model-based tools. And when we talk about performance, we do also need to think about what we feel would constitute good enough performance. As I said earlier, no tool will perform perfectly 100% of the time. And one of the really challenging things is that as a community, we don't actually have consensus on this. But I want to show how this has been approached in the ongoing Cochrane AI tool pilot. So this study uses an innovative adaptive platform design, which means that AI tools can be discontinued if they underperform. So it was therefore important to have some defined thresholds for performance metrics for both the screening and data extraction parts of the study, which are the two evidence synthesis tasks being tested in this pilot study. And so what you can see is those thresholds on the slide. And the thresholds you see here were informed by findings from a community survey that we ran that explored expectations for evidence synthesis when using AI. And I think this also kind of comes back to that matrix that I showed earlier around the potential impact of errors. Essentially, understanding the context in which you want to use an AI tool is absolutely critical. And on that note, I'm going to now hand over to Ella, who's going to, I think, share her screen.
Thanks so much, Anna. Okay. There we go. You should be able to see my screen now, and we're moving on to domain 4. Do shout if you can't see the slides. So domain 4 focuses on whether your team has the skills to use an AI tool reliably, and if not, whether there's sufficient training, support, and time for your team members to learn how to use it. So the first question here, does your team have the skills to use it reliably, can be difficult to assess without having hands-on experience with a tool or understanding how that tool kind of fundamentally works. So one thing to think about here is don't take marketing claims of easy to use at face value. There is always an onboarding and learning investment to use any new tool. It might be helpful to consult someone you know who's already used the tool, or see if you can play around on the tool or the platform, or practice it on it without uploading your data first. It's worth being aware that for some tools there can be a heavy reliance on the team's ability to develop effective prompts, and so these might be specific skills that you need within your team. it's worth checking out the AI tool's guidance, training materials, and what kind of user support that they provide. Additional considerations include whether the tool integrates with your standard workflow or platform. So for example, if you're doing a Cochrane review, you want it to be integratable with or aligned with RevMan. What you don't want to do is invest in using an AI tool for some of the different stages of your review, like screening or data extraction, and then not be able to get your data into the platform that you'll then use for your analyses. And finally, here you want to consider whether the financial costs are acceptable for you. And then finally, we have domain 5, which is all around transparency. We're thinking about licenses here and documentation. So this primarily relates to ensuring the terms of use are acceptable for you. It may require consulting legal teams, as you'll need to understand issues around jurisdiction and licensing, data security and usage rights, and data protection and confidentiality. So for example, speaking to a colleague based in Germany recently who was using this framework, the application met the EU GDPR rules and it met German copyright law, but within their own organisation, it did not meet their confidentiality company policy. And so in the end, they couldn't use the tool. So some of the key considerations within the terms of use that I'll go for a couple of them, but the RAISE 3 guidance, that paper goes into this in a lot more detail and has tips for how to navigate these as well. So first we have plagiarism and provenance. So how can you ensure that you do not present the work of others, so this could be their words, their ideas, or their data, as your own without appropriate attribution or acknowledgement? Second is around copyright and intellectual property, and there are two key areas you need to be wary about. The first is to ensure that you don't breach copyright or license agreements or infringe third-party IP when you upload content into an AI system. So this might be publications of studies, for example. The second is, how do you protect your own IP? So if you're using one of these systems for your own work and you've got the output from these systems that you'll be using in the review, you need to make sure that you don't unintentionally assign any rights to your work to that AI system. Third is around jurisdiction and licensing, and essentially this is confirming that you have access to the system. So for example, some AI tools or systems may have a limited rollout, or they may only be available in specific countries. We then move on to data security, and here you want to pay particular attention to clauses around data ownership and usage rights. And this includes references to whether or not the tool trains on or retains your content. It's strongly recommended that you do not use AI systems that gain any rights to your content to train their system. And then finally, you want to be able to understand the limits on the data you're uploading into the AI tool and to ensure that you don't breach conditions of informed consent, risk harm to individuals if there's personal or identifiable information in there, and ensure you adhere to confidentiality agreements. So a tip here is that if you are supporting the peer review process, a lot of peer reviewed documents for peer review are covered by confidentiality agreements. So it's recommended you don't upload any of those documents to an AI system. You may also want to consider the societal and environmental impact and whether those are acceptable for you. So this is an area being actively worked on. RAISE 3 does provide some general advice that you should think about, such as things like prioritizing those with transparent reporting about their carbon footprint, or ideally having, tools that have or tool providers who have detailed efforts to minimize their carbon footprint. RAISE 3 also includes links to calculators and resources to help you dive deeper into this. And then the last point here is around understanding the funding sources of an AI tool and considering whether there are any conflicts of interest. Best practice from the tool providers is to provide transparent disclosures about their funding and about their sponsorship. And so that they are the 5 domains of the framework. But before we move on to that second expectation for evidence synthesis, we wanted to share this completed example of the responsible handover framework. This is an example in RAISE. It's a supplementary material, and it's for the RCT classifier, which is a machine learning model that assigns records a likelihood score based on whether the machine thinks the record is describing a randomized control trial or not. And so this is a great example for evidence synthesists in terms of what information they should be looking for from the tool developers. But also a great example for the tool developers. Like this is the information that a user of your tool needs to know about to make an informed decision about using the tool. Okay, so we're now moving on to expectation 2 for evidence synthesis, demonstrating the AI tool will not compromise the methodological rigor or integrity of your synthesis. And so as a reminder, that responsible handover framework aims to help you consider the kind of risk of using an AI tool. Is there a low risk? Is there a medium risk? Is there a high risk? There's no algorithm built into the framework, so it's something you'll need to be considering as you're going through the domains. And as Anna mentioned at the beginning, thinking about what's the potential impact of errors based on how you're planning to use the tool and are they acceptable. Evidence synthesists are ultimately responsible for their decision to use a tool, and so you have to be comfortable with the decision that you make after using this framework. And if there isn't enough public information about a tool to make an informed decision, you may decide not to proceed with the tool, or you could proceed with mitigations. There are 3 different kind of decision buckets that could be made after using this framework. The first is that you proceed, and that could be when validation evidence is strong, transparency is high, and risks are well understood or reasonably managed. Second, you might decide to proceed, but you want to proceed with mitigations. And so this applies where the tool shows promise but has gaps in the evidence, requires additional monitoring, or presents moderate risks that could be actively managed. And then third, you may decide that you don't want to proceed. And this might happen when validation evidence is absent, transparency is insufficient for any kind of meaningful assessment, or you've identified risks that you do not think can be adequately mitigated. And here are some of those reasons that might make you decide not to proceed. These are reasons listed in RAISE in the RAISE guidance. So you might have things like have concerns about replicability of the validation, or based on what's available in the validation study, you might have concerns about performance claims, particularly if there are methodological limitations, or it's a validation study from the tool developer themselves. There may be a lack of legal or policy compliance within your organization or at the national or international level. The terms may not allow you to kind of opt out of model training of the content that you upload, or you might decide that the way that the tool is set up, that there's not enough human oversight, so there's no way to monitor or audit AI outputs. Or last, you may decide that an AI tool developer has been unresponsive to your questions, so you can't make an informed decision, or you're not convinced that you would have adequate support from the tool developer when you're using the system. And alongside that framework, the responsible handover framework, we advise that you also look at this guidance in the RAISE 3 paper, which is on the current state of AI tools. This is broken down by systematic review task. So you have screening, searching, critical appraisal, kind of drafting sections of tests, things of text, things like that. You also have the AI tool class. So is it generative AI, unsupervised machine learning, agentic AI, etc. And then there are some examples and a recommendation for use. And these recommendations, there's 5 different potential recommendations for use in this table. The first is acceptable for use. So this is something that has sufficient validation and you're happy to proceed without any mitigations. For these types of tool uses, you would require a disclosure and justification. The second option here is that human verification is required. And so this is where you would require a full disclosure with a description of your verification methods and the justification. Then we have requires validation within the review, so thinking about a study within a review here or a SWA, and this would require full disclosure and a description of your validation methods within the review and justification. Exploratory and supplementary would again require full disclosure with your validation methods and justification. And finally, you have not acceptable. So this obviously means that we do not recommend that you use AI tools in those use cases. And so depending on that state of the art, the state of AI tools table and the recommendations, or if you've completed the framework and you've decided to proceed with mitigations, you may want to be validating the AI tool within your review or verifying all of the outputs or verifying some of the outputs. Requires validation within the review relates to showcasing real-world effectiveness of the tool in your review. So it might be that an AI tool has been validated in an area that was not related to your review topic. And so you'll want to check that the performance of that tool will apply to your review context. And this does require upfront investment. So you're going to need to think about whether the effort to do this is going to be worth the potential gain. Anna has already mentioned Cochrane's AI tool platform study. This is an example of a study within a review or a SWA. The full protocol is now available for this study, and it provides a best practice blueprint for other review teams seeking to validate AI tools within their review. So we do encourage anyone who's thinking about doing a SWA to have a look at this and adapt the protocol to your needs. The other main mitigation here is human verification required. So AI outputs may be used to support review tasks, but they need to be checked carefully by humans before they can be included. And the degree of checking required may vary, but typically does require a human to read and possibly make amendments to the entirety or most of the output. And if you're validating an AI tool within your review, RAISE 2 provides additional guidance here. RAISE 2 covers building and validating AI tools, and that can be for more traditional types of automation like machine learning, as well as large language models. RAISE 2 also covers metric considerations for AI tool evaluations and includes the taxonomy of common performance metrics that you can see on the screen. Many evaluations focus only on accuracy, but there are lots of other factors to consider, including reliability, efficiency, usability, and risk assessment and management. Okay, so moving on to expectation 3. As we've mentioned, nothing is perfect in this space, which is why it's so important that if you do proceed with any tool, that you are transparent about its use. Any AI that makes or suggests judgments should be fully and transparently reported in your manuscript. And we're now going to go through guidance from Cochrane and the Joint AI Methods Group in terms of what should be included in the disclosure. So first, you need to name the tool and the purpose of the tool. You need to report on the degree of human oversight, and also include your justification for use. So in other words, this is providing evidence that the AI tool is methodologically sound and that it won't undermine the trustworthiness or reliability of your findings. So this is where your verification or validation methods would be reported or cited. In addition, there are a couple of other sections where you'll need to include some reporting. So methods, Prisma already includes a note about reporting any automation tools that you use. In the discussion, particularly in the limitations of the review process section, you should detail any limitations of using the AI tool in your review process, particularly any biases or the potential impact of errors, limitations, or generalizability. And finally, if you as an author using a tool have any financial or non-financial interests in the AI platform or tool, if you have shares in that tool, for example, you should be disclosing that along with the funding sources for the tool. And finally, expectation 4, AI should be used with human oversight. We are often asked, what do you mean by human oversight? Because it's not only the degree of kind of human involvement in the AI feature, so whether or not AI suggests and a human approves something, or if the AI decides. It's the conscious decision and justification to use an AI tool. So it's that overall process of using public information, published evidence, and your verification or validation methods that you've used to justify using a tool. Evidence synthesists have expertise in doing reviews and they are responsible for doing them well. AI does not replace humans. The accountability of the work produced must remain with the evidence synthesists. And this is not just a question about kind of publishing conventions around authorship. In order for research to be used, it needs to be worthy of trust. So someone, the evidence synthesist, and not something, AI, is responsible for all the decisions made during the research process and the outputs of that research. So this is one of the most important messages everyone should take home. AI and automation should only be used with human oversight, and the systematic reviewer, the evidence synthesis, remains ultimately accountable for their research. And so to close, we come back to the AI use expectations for evidence synthesis. As AI and automation become more embedded in our processes, we as a community need to ensure that the core principles of research integrity on which evidence synthesis was built are not compromised. So in summary, to help adhere to expectation 1, to ensure evidence synthesis remains ultimately responsible for their research, you should apply the responsible handover framework. To adhere to expectation 2 and demonstrate that the AI tool will not compromise the rigor or integrity of your synthesis, you should use evidence compiled when applying the responsible handover framework, and if necessary, define verification methods or real-world validation methods. Third, to adhere to that third expectation, follow reporting expectations included in the joint AI use position statement or Cochrane's reporting template or similar. And then finally, to adhere to expectation 4 and ensure that AI is used with human oversight, you should apply expectations 1 to 3. And with that, we'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and we open up for any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, both of you. Apologies to anyone with technical issues, and hopefully no one was irritated by my numbering of the slides in the chat for those following on the PDF. Hopefully it worked for you okay, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides. I'm just seeing if there are any questions. There's nothing in Q&A at the moment, but it was a very comprehensive talk, so I don't know if there will be any questions. Let's have a look. Will this recording be shared, and will it be permissible? Yeah, is it permissible to share internally within an institution with a few colleagues? Yeah. Share with anybody.
Absolutely.
It'll be on the
Please.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, share as widely as you like. Please
Yes.
share, in fact.
So we'll just give it a little bit of time for people to think, and if there are any questions. So Ria's got a question here. You can either unmute if you want, Ria, or I can read it out, whichever works for you. I'll just give you a second.
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, a very nice presentation, very insightful. But a thing that I often experience, I'm an information specialist in the library in the Netherlands at Wageningen University and research. But it's really a challenge for researchers to figure out what can we do and what can we not do. And I mean, of course, we have to point them on all these different things about transparency and about that you're always responsible for what you produce. And we have to say, okay, you have to be aware of copyright. What are you allowed to upload in a tool? What are you not allowed to do? But it's very hard to give recommendations what to do and what not to do, and what can we expect from them? What can we do to help them, that we say, okay, forget about these tools, and maybe this is a tool that can be an option for you because that's safe with respect to, yeah, whatever. That you say, okay, the data are not being used for training, the hallucination is low, things like that. So I think that's a very important thing, what researchers would like to know, and not saying to them, well, it's up to you to figure out if you can safely use a tool or not.
I'm happy to go first on this one, Anna.
Go for it.
Yeah, so it's a brilliant question, and definitely something that evidence synthesis and members of the Cochrane community are struggling with. The Joint AI Methods Group, which includes representatives from Cochrane, Campbell, JBI, and the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, we did talk about whether we could kind of create like a risk profile for different tools if tool developers submitted kind of information on the tools to us, but we felt that we did not have the capacity to do that, particularly because it's evolving continuously. These systems are continuing to change, and so with that, performance changes. There was also potential risk of putting some kind of risk profile against a tool, and those being, if it was said to be low risk, that it could be said that Cochrane endorses this tool, and it's difficult because a tool has to be assessed for a specific review, so it's very difficult to have overarching kind of positions about tools. It is worth mentioning, if you've heard of the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, this is a cross-sector global initiative that is trying to address some of these big gaps in AI-enabled evidence synthesis, and one area of work that they're looking at is how could we create an inventory of validated AI tools. So that's probably the area I would look to for this for future information, but that's work that's in development. We are within Cochrane as well. We are encouraging AI tool developers to sign up to a mailing list that we've created so that we can tell them about what the expectations are, so that they can make things transparent and public, so it's easier for users to make an informed decision about using the tools. And we'd also encourage everyone who's doing evaluations to publish case studies and publish the evaluations to share learnings across the community as well. Anna, anything?
I think you pretty much covered everything. The only thing I was going to sort of emphasize, which you did touch on, is that, you know, this is obviously a rapidly evolving space. And what we've got right now with RAISE is as much of the considerations and issues and challenges that we could amass. Really, we wanted to have absolutely everything in sort of one place, if you like. But recognizing that itself, it becomes fairly overwhelming for people to navigate. What we hope to do is, as the evidence base evolves, is also to evolve RAISE and to have it sort of more available online, more interactive, so that people can go with certain sort of queries and sort of work through a decision tree around using a tool and that kind of thing. But also, I think the other sort of key point to say is so many of these tools at the moment are at a certain sort of quite an immature stage of their life cycle. And as tools progress and as those validations are done, and hopefully those validations are done, you know, by adhering to RAISE recommendations, tools will reach a certain level of maturity. And once they do, it then does become much easier to be able to say, look, if your context meets these, criteria, this tool is probably suitable for use. It's a bit like we've got to that stage now with the RCT classifier, for example. We don't expect evidence synthesis to have to go through, and check that the tool is going to be perfect in every single context that they're going to use. Obviously, it's just still very important to disclose when it's updated and what the training and test data was used for it to make sure that it does match your use case. But ultimately, that's now reached a stage where, you don't need to be quite so involved in assessing its suitability.
Thank you. The questions are flying in now. I'm going to hopefully synthesize two of these from Jules and from Kerry, wanting to know if you have any personal stories of successful use of cases for AI in reviews. As Kerry's saying, in the NHS, it can be quite difficult to gain access to different tools. And as you were talking about, potentially a small body of case studies gleaned from Cochrane projects. So yeah, any success stories that you can think of and can share?
I mean, I just mentioned, and it's not using large language model technology, but the RCT classifier, for example, is an example of successful development and implementation of an automation tool for one part of the process. And so what we've done in RAISE 3 is complete the handover framework example using that as the case study there, so people can kind of see what's required in order for a tool to kind of demonstrate that it meets the sort of criteria for wide scale use. We also did touch on the AI tool pilot that's being conducted at the moment in Cochrane. We don't have the results of that yet, but we are working on that sort of fairly rapidly. And the two sort of areas that we are initially testing are screening of search results and data extraction. It's going to be really interesting to see the results of those. And my thought just in general about some of these tools that rely on large language model capability is that, as I've said a few times in the presentation, no tool is going to be perfect. It's going to be about working out where we can safely implement these tools a lot of the time. They might be able to do a part of a task really nicely, and then the rest not so much. So it really is going to be sort of teasing out where their strengths and limitations lie. And it probably, frustratingly, will vary across domain and sort of review type. But yeah.
And we're also seeing the first, like other Cochrane review author teams adapting the protocol for that platform study, the SWA protocol for within their own review. So I think this is an area where we will start seeing more studies being conducted to that kind of methodological rigor, because that protocol was really developed based on the best practice in RAISE. It's one of the first evaluations that really embedded all the different performance metrics and other elements of the RAISE recommendations.
And lots of excellent feedback about the presentation. And Lise has a question more around machine learning software. Well, she's asking how you would report on using PubReminer to try to identify further keywords for a troublesome concept when the same concept does not have a subject heading. Is it enough to report that same was used in addition to other methods to try and identify terms for TIAB? Sorry, I'm not a systematic review expert. I'm just a merely faculty librarian for engineering. But yeah, I didn't know if that question makes sense to you folks.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's kind of around, so whenever you use any sort of automation tool, like how much do you need to sort of report about it? And one of the things it comes back to is what Ella mentioned and what I mentioned is around its like what what would be the impact of error. So if you look at our state of the tool table as well, you'll be able to see kind of various different recommendations there. And in some cases, for example, this is a really nice example with Pub Reminer. You wouldn't need to do an absolute full massive disclosure on this. You're using it as a sort of supplementary additional activity to help identify potential terms for your search, whatever. It's just one of many approaches. It's not the single point of failure. If it goes wrong, it's not the end of the world for your review. So it is a case of sort of judging what the potential is for if it goes wrong, essentially. And Ella, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Nope, I'm not an information specialist either, so the specifics on that one, I definitely defer to you, Anna.
So yeah, I think I've covered everything, but you will have access to the chat, and if there's anything that we haven't followed upon, are you okay to answer those afterwards?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just having a look.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Brilliant. Kerry's come back and is crossing over similar questions to those that I'd use when running a rapid review. So perhaps it's a possibility to extend our critical appraisal skills to the tools we use, from Kerry.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And lots of more thanks for a very comprehensive presentation. And I think if we haven't got any more questions, or anybody pipe up if I haven't managed to gather your question. Just giving a quick look through, and I'm just going to check the Q&A, but people tend to put things in the chat. And Sophie's just put a short survey in today to get any sort of feedback on today's SR conversation. And I know these are really popular and a lot of people attend and watch it live, but then the viewing figures on the videos is really high as well. Yeah, well, lots of thanks coming in. And I'd like to just extend that and thank you both for an excellent presentation.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us along.